My name is Claire Maddox, and on the night of my father's 40th anniversary of service, a celebrated general, he ordered me handcuffed in the middle of a brightly lit banquet hall. In front of hundreds of guests, he called me a traitor to the military, while my brother stood beside him, smiling as if he'd been waiting for this moment his whole life. Have you ever had your own family turn into enemies, to the point where they're willing to destroy your honor? If this story strikes a chord with you, leave a comment, hit like, and subscribe so we can walk together on my journey to expose everything. Because what happened that night was only the beginning of a battle they never expected me to fight back. I can still remember the cold bite of the handcuffs around my wrists, the murmur of guests blending with the clink of glasses, and the proud glint in my father's eyes as he ordered me taken away. But to understand why that night became the final blow, I have to take you far back, to where the first cracks in the Maddox family began to form. When I was 16, we lived at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. It was the kind of standard senior officer's house you'd expect. White picket fence, neatly trimmed lawn, the American flag fluttering in the breeze out front. From the outside, we looked like the picture-perfect U.S. military family. Inside, the air was always heavy with silence. Everything in our home followed my father's regulations. The schedule, the words we spoke, even how we made eye contact. My mother, Evelyn, was a history professor at the nearby university. Gentle but sharp-minded, she had a way of speaking that made you feel like you mattered. When my father was away on assignment, she was the one who kept the house filled with laughter, the smell of apple pie, and stories about the great explorers of the past. But between her and my father, there always seemed to be a fog no one could touch. One September afternoon, I came home from school to find the house eerily quiet. Mom usually met me at the door, asking what I'd learned that day, but there was no one there. I called out through the house, no answer. Her bedroom was empty, the closet door cracked open, a few clothes gone. Her desk was strangely neat, as if scrubbed of life, except for one family photo face down. That evening, my father came home in full uniform, his face carved from stone. "Where's Mom?" I asked. "She's gone." "Don't ask again," he replied flatly. I searched his eyes for some trace of sadness, but found only coldness. At dinner, he spoke about my grades, about preparing for military prep school, as if Mom had never existed. 2 days later, while changing the bed sheets, I found an old brown notebook hidden under the mattress. The cover was worn, the corners of the pages yellowed. Inside were strange symbols, letters mixed with numbers, and lines of handwriting I didn't understand. Some pages had maps, lines connecting places I'd never heard of. I almost took the notebook to my father, but something told me to keep it secret. I hid it in my jewelry box, and every night I'd look through it, trying to guess its meaning. Every symbol, every word felt like it was pulling me toward something bigger. My brother Drew was already at West Point and rarely came home. When he did, he brought the glow of the family pride, stories of grueling training, praise from commanders, and my father's beaming approval. I listened, feeling both admiration and smallness. One night, alone in the kitchen, I asked him about Mom. "She chose to leave, Claire. Don't dwell on it. We've got more important things to do for this family than think about someone who walked away," he said. There was no sadness in his voice, only detachment, as if she'd never mattered. But I didn't believe the walked-away story. My gut told me Mom left because of something dangerous, and that notebook was the key. That winter, I started researching the symbols. I combed through books at the library, searched the early, sluggish internet. Some looked like military codes, others like classic ciphers. The deeper I dug, the more convinced I became. This was no random journal, but a deliberate system. One evening, as I was working in my room, I heard heavy footsteps in the hallway. My father stood at the door, staring at the open notebook on my desk. I shut it quickly, but he'd already seen. "What's this?" he asked, voice low. "Mom's notebook. I found it under the bed." He stepped in, flipped through a few pages, then slammed it shut. "Don't touch this again. Forget it." He walked out with the notebook in hand. But the next morning, it was back on my desk, untouched, except for a small scrap of paper tucked inside. "You'll need this one day." And that M could only be her. It was her handwriting. From that day, I was sure she hadn't left out of boredom or fatigue. She'd left me a message, and she wanted me to find the truth. Over the years, I kept the notebook hidden, even from Drew. I excelled in school, but instead of applying to West Point like my father wanted, I chose another path. The U.S. Army Criminal Investigation Division Command, USACDC. It was a place where I could follow trails, decode truths, and most importantly, find out where my mother had gone and why. My father's reaction was explosive. "You're wasting your potential on small-time work. This family needs a commander, not a detective." He spat, the last word like an insult. "You need a commander," I replied, "but I need the truth." In my early years at USACDC, I felt like the odd one out. Colleagues said I focused too much on details, wasting time on dots and commas in reports, but that precision helped me crack a case involving stolen military equipment in Texas. Reading the suspect's coded messages, I recognized patterns eerily similar to the notebook's symbols. For the first time, my work and the family mystery overlapped. When the case closed, I stared at the sealed evidence, thinking of the notebook's pages, knowing deep down I was on the right track. I told no one, but inside, I knew every case I solved was a step closer to the truth Mom had left behind. Do you think a secret could be so big it makes a mother disappear? I've asked myself that for years. Sometimes the answer chills me. Maybe it wasn't just her life it threatened, but mine too. What kind of secret do you think could make a mother vanish? Take a guess before I reveal more. I entered USACDC with a mix of eagerness and caution, as if opening a door that led to both opportunity and hidden traps. The months-long training at Fort Leonard Wood didn't just teach me how to collect evidence, interview witnesses, or write airtight reports. It sharpened my ability to read the smallest changes in a person's expression, to hear the things they didn't say, and to see what was hidden between lines of seemingly harmless words. From day one, I realized I was the odd one. Most classmates came from law, criminology, or at least military police backgrounds. Me, the girl who'd spent hours in libraries decoding her mother's mysterious notebook, walked in with a degree in linguistics and history that earned me glances that mixed curiosity and doubt. One afternoon, while the whole class was practicing a mock trial, the training sergeant, a big man with a gravelly voice, looked straight at me and said bluntly, "Maddox, do you really think your linguistics degree is going to help when you have to take down an armed suspect?" I just smiled and answered simply, "It helps me understand him before he pulls the trigger." He paused for a moment, then gave a slight nod, as if unwilling to admit the answer made sense. I was assigned to an investigative branch in Texas, handling cases tied to military equipment and defense contractors. The environment was harsher than I'd imagined. In the office, printers hummed nonstop, phones rang without pause, and whiteboards were covered with diagrams and names pinned with red magnets. Most of my colleagues were men, many of them fresh from combat zones. They called each other by nicknames, but I got the special label Georgetown. Like a constant reminder, I was the bookish college girl dropped into their world. At first, I was given nothing but support work, checking records, reviewing reports, or translating the occasional foreign document. But I didn't complain. I knew that if I wanted to survive here, I had to prove my worth without demanding it. The opportunity came one day in mid-May. We were investigating the disappearance of a shipment of newly delivered night vision equipment. On paper, the boxes had been transferred, but in reality, they had never reached their unit. The only lead was a string of messages between technicians, sloppily encrypted. I happened to glance at them and noticed something odd. English words interspersed with symbols that looked like a basic cipher. Something about it felt familiar. I took a printed copy home, pulled my mother's notebook from its hiding place, and my heart pounded when I saw a similar pattern in one of her pages. I spent the entire night comparing each symbol, each punctuation mark. They didn't match perfectly, but the underlying logic was the same, using context-specific historical terms or place names to conceal real information. The next morning, I got to the office earlier than usual and laid my preliminary decryption on the team leader's desk. He frowned and looked at me. "Where'd you get this skill?" I just shrugged. "From books." I couldn't tell him that the skill came from my mother's notebook, The one piece of evidence I believed was tied to something far bigger than any case I'd worked on. Once the code was broken, we traced the equipment to a warehouse on the outskirts of Dallas. Inside, dozens of crates of night vision gear were hidden under layers of fake goods. The raid was quick, and the after-action report went up the chain. On paper, it was a team victory, but I knew without those nights spent decoding, the case could have dragged on for months. After that, people started to notice me. Colleagues stopped saying Georgetown with sarcasm and started giving me subtle nods of respect. But with my father, nothing changed. On one of the rare nights I went home for dinner, he asked, "I hear you cracked a case in Dallas?" "Yes, sir." He just nodded, then turned to ask Drew about his new sniper training rotation. As always, the conversation rolled on with me as nothing more than a shadow at the table. I learned to live with it. Maybe I'd stopped hoping he'd ever look at me the way he looked at Drew. But I never stopped pursuing the truth. In every case, I searched for small details that might connect to my mother's mystery. Most of the time, there was nothing. But sometimes, a single symbol in a data file or a name on a contact list was enough to make me think of those notebook pages. Once, while reviewing the records of a small defense contractor, I found an employee name that matched an abbreviation from one of my mother's diagrams. I made a note of it, but when I dug deeper, the file had vanished from the system. They told me it was a technical glitch. I didn't believe it. Gradually, I realized my work wasn't just about investigating military crimes. It had become a personal mission. Every case, every report could be a missing puzzle piece. And I was willing to dig, even if it made some people uncomfortable. One evening, as I was packing up files, my usually reserved lieutenant walked over, set his hand on my stack of folders, and asked, "Are you sure you want to keep going down this path, Maddox? It won't take you to medal ceremonies, but it will lead you into the shadows of the military, places a lot of people want to keep buried." Without hesitation, I said, "I want to be there." He nodded once and walked away, leaving me with a single line I'll never forget. "Good. But remember, sometimes your enemy isn't on the other side of the battlefield." That line haunted me. It made me think of my father, of the look in his eyes whenever I talked about my work. And it made me understand that the path I'd chosen wasn't just a career. It was an unspoken challenge to my own family, a family where honor and truth didn't always stand on the same side. If you've ever heard of cases where the clue came from someone's personal past, hit like so I know you want to hear more. One winter night, the Texas air was sharp with cold, the wind howling through the cracks in the window of my small office at Fort Hood. I was hunched over, reviewing the files of an unresolved arms smuggling case, when my desk phone rang. The caller ID made my chest tighten. "Private. Unlisted." I picked up, and a familiar voice came immediately, low and sharp, like a military order. "And Claire." It was my father. "We need to talk." Before I could respond, he continued, his voice steady and cold. "Tomorrow, you'll be assigned the Ravencore Systems case. It's a longtime military partner. There's a damaging technical report about to be filed, and I want adjustments made." I frowned and straightened in my chair. "Adjustments? What do you mean?" "Rewrite certain parts," he said quickly, as if it were just a matter of changing a few harmless words. "Remove anything that could hurt Ravencore. Emphasize that the equipment's performance still meets combat requirements. This is about strategic partnership, not something for you to analyze with your word games." I stayed silent for a few seconds, keeping my voice calm. "You know, if that report is false, the consequences will fall on the soldiers using the equipment." He exhaled sharply, the sound thick with impatience. "Daughter, you're still green. This isn't just about ideals, it's about politics, relationships, and family honor. I paved the way for you to get this position. Now it's time to give back." "Give back?" "By betraying my oath of service," I asked, my voice tight. There was a long pause. When he spoke again, his tone had hardened, like he was giving an order to a subordinate. "This isn't a request, Claire. This is an order." I stared at the cup of cold coffee on the table, a strange mix of emotions washing over me. Strange, because my father had never directly asked me to do something so blatantly wrong before. Familiar, because I knew he believed his power was enough to make me do anything. "I can't," I said slowly, each word deliberate. A heavy hum came through the line. "You'll regret it." Then the call cut off. I sat frozen, listening to the wind slipping through the crack in the door, the chill seeping straight into my bones. For the first time, I saw a clear line drawn, and I had stepped over it. The next morning, I received the Ravencore file. Thick stacks of technical reports, pages crammed with data. It only took me a few hours to spot the anomalies. Critical components in the night vision goggles were faulty, with several failing under standard test conditions. The technicians' internal reports flagged the risks, but the draft intended for higher command had transformed those serious flaws into minor issues already resolved. I carefully saved all the data onto my personal encrypted hard drive, a habit I'd picked up from seeing files disappear in other sensitive cases. The day dragged. I worked late into the evening, trying to shake the feeling that I was being watched. When I left the office, I noticed a black SUV parked in a dark corner of the lot, headlights off, engine silent. I glanced at it without stopping, but I could feel eyes on me as I walked to my car. 2 days later, I returned to my small apartment off base after a late shift. The door was locked as usual, but the moment I switched on the lights, I knew something was wrong. The coat I'd left draped over a chair was now neatly hanging on the rack. The desk drawer was slightly ajar, and there was a faint, unfamiliar scent, cigarette smoke I'd never smelled here before. I rushed to my desk, opened the drawer where I kept my encrypted hard drive. Empty. Only a small folded note remained. In short, handwritten words, "Don't get involved in what isn't yours." I stood frozen, my heartbeat thudding in my ears. This wasn't a random burglary. They hadn't taken money, hadn't touched other electronics, only the one thing that mattered most to me, and they were confident enough to leave a message. I called base security to report the break-in. The duty officer logged it, promised to check the cameras, but his tone told me I'd never get any results. I didn't believe the surveillance system was intact anyway. Ravencore had deep ties within the military, and my father knew exactly how to use them. That night, I lay awake on the sofa, my mind spinning around one question. If my father was willing to send someone into his own daughter's home just to take a copy of the data, what else was he willing to do? The next morning, I arrived at the office earlier than usual. On my desk sat an unmarked white envelope. Inside was a small silver USB drive, an old, scratched model that looked like it had passed through many hands. No note. I checked it on a standalone computer, completely isolated from the internal network. There was only one file, a short video showing 2 Ravencore technicians testing equipment. The audio was grainy, but I could clearly hear one say, "We have to report this defect. It's dangerous." The other replied, "Boss said ignore it. Maddox has arranged it." I froze the frame and rewound. The word Maddox was unmistakable. It was my last name, but in this case, it clearly wasn't referring to me. I knew I had just been handed my first proof that my father was directly involved in covering up the truth. But who had sent it to me? And why? While I was still thinking, my phone rang. The caller was a technician I'd worked with on another case. His voice was low and urgent. "Maddox, you're deeper in this than you think. Meet me tonight in the basement parking lot at Franklin Mall, 9 p.m. Don't bring your military phone." I hesitated for a few seconds, then agreed. 9 p.m., the basement lot was nearly empty. The smell of gasoline and the echo of footsteps made the air taut with tension. A figure emerged from the shadows. It was him, baseball cap pulled low over his face. He handed me a small paper bag. Inside was a thick stack of documents, signatures, invoices, and contracts between Ravencore and the Pentagon. Several pages bore my father's signature. He spoke quietly. "This is all I can give you. They're watching me. Don't call me again." Before I could ask more, he turned and disappeared into the darkness. I sat in my car, opening the file under the dim yellow light. Each page felt heavier in my hands. The numbers, the clauses, carefully crafted to hide inflated costs and substandard components. Every signed approval cut deeper into the fragile trust I had left in my father. I knew, from that moment on, this was no longer just a standard investigation. This was a war. And this time, the enemy wasn't some faceless organization. It was my own family. I couldn't just sit with the file in my possession. The longer I held on to it, the closer the danger crept. But I also knew that if I didn't trace this network all the way through, the evidence would vanish in a day. And my father, along with Ravencore, would walk free again, just as they had for years. 3 days after the secret meeting in the parking garage, I was assigned to escort a witness in the Ravencore case back from New Orleans. He was a former technician who had worked directly on the equipment tests. He'd agreed to cooperate but requested military police protection because someone was trying to silence him. We left Louis Armstrong Airport in the evening, the car rolling along roads by the Mississippi River, neon lights from bars reflecting off the water. Outside was damp and heavy, but inside the car, the air was unnervingly still. I sat in the front seat, eyes on the rearview mirror. About 15 minutes later, I noticed a silver sedan tailing us since the Crescent City Connection Bridge. At first, I thought it was coincidence, but when the driver took an alternate route to check, the car stayed behind us, keeping the same steady distance. "That car's been on us since the bridge," I said quietly to the driver, my right hand hovering near the handgun at my side. He gave a slight nod, pressing the accelerator. But only seconds later, from ahead, a black SUV slid out from a narrow alley, blocking the road. At the same time, the sedan behind closed in, forcing us to stop. 4 masked men stepped out, moving with the precision of special operations. One approached my door, leaning down. Through the fabric over his face, his voice was low and drawn out, carrying a faint southern lilt. "Your father wants you to know. This is your final warning." He slipped something small into the pocket of my jacket, then signaled to his partners to back off. They turned and vanished as quickly as they had appeared, leaving the road wide open. I pulled the object out. It was an empty USB drive, completely void of data. No explanation was needed. I understood it wasn't a gift, but a statement. "We know what you're holding, and we can reach you anytime we want." The witness in the back seat trembled, speaking almost in a whisper. "I told you. They're not going to let me live." I turned to look at him, forcing my voice to stay firm. "As long as you're with me, no one touches you." But deep down, I knew things had gone far beyond normal control. The boldness of that group, in the middle of downtown, less than a mile from the police station, proved they had protection, and that protection wasn't from strangers. We made it back to the safe rendezvous point. As soon as I handed off the witness, I went straight to my office and plugged the USB into a standalone computer. Empty, just as I'd predicted. But hidden in the memory was a single file, just a string of meaningless characters. I copied it to a separate drive, unease creeping through me. I picked up my personal phone and scrolled to the number of someone I only contacted when things were truly urgent. Eli Harper. Eli had once been a cybersecurity specialist I'd pulled out during a mission in Afghanistan. At the time, he was trapped inside a building surrounded by local militia, and I had led the team that breached and got him out. From that day on, we stayed in touch, occasionally trading information, though we rarely met in person. The call connected after 2 rings. "Claire, it's been a while since I heard your voice." "Eli, I need you to check something, as soon as possible." His voice dropped, turning serious. "Send it through the usual encrypted channel. And Claire, stay safe." I sent the file, then sat in my office, spinning a ballpoint pen between my fingers, eyes fixed on the screen. About an hour later, Eli's encrypted message appeared. Not data. Hidden audio recording. I quickly opened the decrypted file. A man's voice came through, every word clear. "Just warn her, don't take her life. Her father wants to handle it himself if she doesn't listen." I recognized it instantly. It was Drew's voice, my brother. Leaning back in my chair, a cold, stinging sensation ran down my spine. His words confirmed everything. Tonight's ambush wasn't some spontaneous act. This was planned, a message sent directly from my family. I didn't sleep that night. Images of the tailing sedan, the voice under the mask, and Drew's words kept circling in my head. I thought of my mother, how she had left, and why. Had she received warnings like this before she disappeared? The next morning, I called Eli through the secure channel. "This isn't about Ravencore anymore. They want to scare me into backing off." "What are you going to do?" Eli asked, his tone even, though I could sense the tension. "Keep going. But I'm not risking my witness's life. I need to get him somewhere safe first. Eli was silent for a few seconds, then said, "If they've been bold enough to make a move in New Orleans, they won't stop. You'd better be ready for the worst." "I know," I replied, then hung up. That afternoon, I went back to the interrogation room to meet the witness again. He looked tired, but his eyes carried more resolve. "I've thought it over," he said. "I'll tell everything, but I need protection for my family." "You'll have that," I promised. "But you also have to be ready. Once we start, there's no going back." He nodded, and for the first time, I saw trust in his eyes. As I was leaving the room, I ran into the major in charge of security. He pulled me aside, lowering his voice. "Maddox, I heard you had a meeting in New Orleans. Do you want to report it up the chain and watch the file disappear like every other time?" I shot back. He studied me for a long moment, then said, "Be careful, Claire. Around here, not everyone wearing the same uniform is on the same side." His words reminded me of what a lieutenant in Texas once told me. Maybe they'd never been truer than now. Do you think you can guess who's really behind this? Leave a comment. I want to see if anyone figures out the twist. The next day, I was reviewing the witness's entire case file when the office landline rang. The number was blocked, but I recognized the voice before he even said his name. "Claire." My father's voice came through, deep and dry, like the knock of a gun stock against wood. "What do you think you're doing?" I drew in a deep breath. "I'm doing my job, sir." There was a long pause before he spoke again, slow and deliberate, each word like a knife cut. "Your job is sabotaging a contract worth hundreds of millions of dollars, dragging the whole family into the mud." Leaning back in my chair, I stared straight out the window. "I'm not dragging anyone. If that contract is clean, no one has anything to worry about." He gave a low chuckle, but there was no humor in it. "You're still as naive as ever. Let me remind you, Maddox never shoots himself in the foot." I was used to his cryptic lines, but today, I refused to let it pass. If Maddox means turning a blind eye while others make money off the blood of soldiers, then I don't want the name. The sharp breath I heard told me exactly how his face must have darkened. "You'll regret this, Claire. Don't make me say it again." The call ended abruptly. I sat still, feeling it in my bones. This time, my father wasn't just angry. He was afraid. That afternoon, as I was closing the file, a figure appeared in the doorway. It was a young logistics officer. He glanced around before stepping in and placing a thin envelope on my desk. "Someone asked me to give this to you," he said quietly, then turned and left before I could ask a single question. Inside was a small memory card and a hastily scribbled note. From the inside, "Trustworthy." I used a standalone computer to open it. A series of audio files appeared, each no more than a few minutes long. The voice in them made my heart sink. It was Drew, my brother. "Yeah. We need to make sure she's removed from this case. Ravencore can't handle another damaging report. If necessary, I'll speak to Father. He knows how to handle Claire." I replayed that line over and over, feeling each word carve into my skin. Drew didn't just know I was investigating. He saw me as a threat to be eliminated. I immediately called Eli through the secure channel. He picked up almost instantly. "Something new?" he asked. "Recordings," I answered, my voice hoarse. "It's Drew. And he said Father would handle me." Eli was silent for a moment before saying, "Send them to me. Don't keep anything important where you are." I did as he said, sending all the files. Less than an hour later, Eli called back, his voice more tense than usual. "Claire, this isn't just heat-of-the-moment talk. I found evidence directly linking Drew to Ravencore's CEO. They've been in contact multiple times before key points in the investigation. Any details? Not fully extracted yet, but enough to see this is coordination, not coincidence. And listen, I think your mother might have had the same kind of information." The words hit me like a punch to the chest. "What do you mean?" "Some old Ravencore recordings I found have a woman's voice, using an alias, but the way she framed her questions is very similar to your interrogation style. If it was your mother, she was close to exposing them. I clenched my fists, trying to steady the surge of emotions. All the pieces seemed to be turning toward the same point. Father, Drew, Ravencore, and my mother's disappearance. That night, I decided to meet the witness again to confirm what I suspected. The security room was unusually quiet. When I walked in, he looked up, his eyes wary. "They've already come for you, haven't they?" he asked. I didn't deny it. "I need you to tell me, during the trials, did anyone from my family show up?" He hesitated for a few seconds, then nodded. "Yes, a man who looked like you, but a bit older. I figured he was your brother. He came with the Ravencore management team, didn't say much, but it was clear everyone listened to him." That confirmation was like a clean cut, slicing away any doubt. Drew didn't just know about Ravencore, he was part of them. I left the room, my head spinning. On the way back, I called Eli. "We need all communications between Drew and Ravencore, and I want to know where my mother went after she disappeared." Eli's reply was short. "I'm tracing it. But Claire, be ready. The answer might not be what you want." I knew he was right. But at this point, there was no turning back. I didn't sleep at all that night. Drew's recordings, the witness's confirmation, and the questions about my mother's disappearance tangled together into a storm in my mind. By the time the pale morning light seeped through the curtains, I had decided. I had to unlock my mother's notebook. If Eli was right, it could hold all the answers. I took it out from my personal safe. The pages had yellowed, carrying the faint scent of old paper mixed with the lavender my mother always used to store in her books. I placed it on the desk, turned the lamp to full brightness, and began flipping through. My eyes swept over lines of text, symbols, and strange drawings, maps, characters mixing Old English and French, and markings that looked like military codes. I called Eli on the secure line. "I need you to come to Fort Hood. Now." "What is it?" "My mother's code. I think I've cracked part of it, but I need your eyes." 3 hours later, Eli walked into my office, still in a black jacket with a baseball cap pulled low. He didn't waste time with small talk, just looked at the notebook and said, "Let me see." We sat across from each other, each page examined under the light and occasionally photographed for analysis. Whenever Eli spotted a repeating pattern, he made notes, linking it to another symbol. I recognized that many of the passages were actually quotes from letters or military reports my mother had once studied, a way to disguise real information under an innocent cover. Close to noon, Eli stopped at one page. "Here," he pointed to a line of mixed letters and numbers. "This is a shift cipher, but—" He paused, glancing at me. "Claire, this isn't random code. It looks like coordinates." I leaned in. Sure enough, it was a sequence that could be converted into latitude and longitude. Eli entered it into his computer, and a map popped up. A remote area on the outskirts of Santa Fe, New Mexico. I pushed my chair back, my heart racing. My mother, she never mentioned knowing anyone there. Eli closed the notebook. Maybe she didn't want anyone to know. And if this is a place she left behind, it must matter. 2 days later, we flew to Albuquerque, then rented a car to drive north. The road cut through barren land, with distant mountains glowing red-orange under the afternoon sun. As we neared the coordinates, the GPS led us to a narrow dirt road, almost unused. At the end stood a small wooden house, its tin roof weathered, windows shut tight. I stepped out of the car, feeling the heavy stillness in the air. Eli walked ahead, knocking lightly on the door. No answer. He was about to knock again when the sound of a lock clicking echoed inside. The door creaked open and a woman stood there. Her hair was streaked with silver, but her eyes— those eyes stopped me cold. I had seen them in the mirror every day. "Mom?" I breathed. Evelyn looked at me for a long time, as if trying to be sure of what she was seeing. Then she opened the door wider, her voice trembling. "Come in, Claire." We sat in a small living room, the scent of fresh coffee filling the air. She poured me a cup, her hands slightly shaking. Eli stayed quiet in the chair across from us, giving space for the two of us. "You found my notebook," I began. "It led me here." She pressed her lips together, setting her cup down. "I left it because I knew one day you'd find me. Your father, he never forgave me once I started investigating Ravencore." I clenched my fists. Father was directly involved. Not just involved. Her voice dropped, but it was firm. He and Drew signed the first contracts together, overlooking technical flaws in exchange for massive kickbacks. When I found the evidence, I knew I couldn't stay. It felt as if all the noise in my head had suddenly gone silent, leaving only that sentence echoing. What were you going to do with the evidence? Give it to someone I could trust in the Pentagon. But before I could, I got a warning. She looked me straight in the eye, just like you have now. I swallowed hard. What did they do? She didn't answer right away. After a moment, she reached into the desk drawer and pulled out an old, scratched USB drive. This is the last copy I kept. It contains contracts, internal emails, and a recording of Drew speaking with the Ravencore CEO from 10 years ago. Eli leaned forward. We need to back this up immediately. I took the USB, feeling its weight in my hand. Mom, why didn't you use it to expose them? Because you were only 16 then, she said slowly. I couldn't let you become a target. Those words made my throat tighten. For years, I had believed my mother abandoned me. Now I understood. She left to protect me. We stayed in Santa Fe for one more night. Eli used his laptop and mobile equipment to back up all the USB data, encrypt it, and send it to multiple secure servers. I sat with my mother at the dining table, talking about the years we had lost. She told me about her life in hiding, working part-time at a local library, always looking over her shoulder. Are you sure you want to go up against them? She asked, her eyes shining with both worry and pride. They won't stop. I squeezed her hand. I already am, Mom. The only difference now is, I'm not alone. Eli walked in from the next room, carrying a portable hard drive. It's done. We have copies in 3 separate locations. If one is wiped, the other 2 will stay intact. I nodded. All the pieces were in place. But I knew that to bring the truth to light, we'd have to play our moves carefully and be ready for my father and Drew to strike back. If this story makes you question things you thought were obvious, share the video so others can hear it too. When we left Santa Fe, I knew I had crossed a line I could never go back from. In my suitcase, tucked between clothes and files, was my mother's data copy, something that could completely destroy my father's career and reputation, and drag Drew and Ravencore down with him. But it could also put my mother and me in more danger than ever before. On the way back, Eli drove, his eyes constantly checking the rearview mirror. He didn't say much, but I knew he was calculating every move. When we crossed into Texas, he finally spoke. We can't put this straight into the military system. If we do, your father will know before anyone else even reads it. So what's your plan? I asked, still looking out the window. We need a stage, he said, glancing at me. Somewhere they can't control the narrative, at a moment when they won't have time to react. I understood instantly. The first image that came to mind was my father's upcoming awards ceremony, where top military officials, the press, and major partners would all be present. The ceremony next week, I said softly. If this information was released there, in front of everyone, Eli nodded. Exactly. But to do that, we have to bypass the event's security layers, get the data into the presentation system without being detected before it hits the screen, and we'll need someone inside to help. I thought for a few seconds, then remembered someone Major Reese, from the Pentagon's Event Tech Division, who had worked with me on a case involving fraudulent equipment monitoring. He owed me a favor. The next day, I arranged to meet Reese at a coffee shop near Arlington. He arrived a few minutes late, in plain clothes, baseball cap pulled low. When he sat down, he studied me carefully. Hearing your voice on the phone, I knew something serious was up. I didn't waste time. I need to insert a video and some documents into the awards ceremony's presentation next week. It has to play publicly, with the whole room watching, and no chance for anyone to cut it off. Reese raised an eyebrow. Claire, you know this could cost me my job if I'm caught. I know, I said, meeting his gaze. But if you see what I have, you'll understand why it's worth it. I handed him a copy of the data. Reese opened his tablet, scrolled through a few files, then stopped at the recording of Drew and the Ravencore CEO. He looked up, his expression changing from skeptical to resolute. I'll do it, he said quietly. But you'll need to give me a separate encrypted file and a signal so I know exactly when to run it. You'll have it, I promised. In the days that followed, Eli and I mapped out every detail. We analyzed the seating chart, the projector setup, the timing of speeches, and the only window to insert the content. Right after my father received the award, before the MC moved to the closing segment. 90 seconds max, Eli said, eyes fixed on the diagram. Enough to show the signatures, the contract, and one audio clip. We have to hit them with the most damaging parts. I chose 3 things. The signed contract with my father and Drew's names, an internal Ravencourt email discussing profits regardless of soldier risk, and finally, Drew's voice. He wants to handle her himself if she doesn't obey. Once assembled, Eli created an encrypted slideshow that would auto-run when triggered by a thumb-sized remote. All you have to do is press this button, he told me. Once it starts, no one can stop it in time. 3 days before the ceremony, I got a call from my mother, using an unknown number. Her voice was soft but steady. Claire, are you sure you're going through with this? Mom, if we stay silent, everything you've worked for all these years will mean nothing. There was a pause on the other end of the line before she spoke. Then see it through. But remember your father. He won't back down easily. I know, I replied, ending the call. The day of the ceremony, the sky over Washington, D.C. was overcast. I wore my dress uniform, the Maddox nameplate feeling heavier than it ever had. Eli walked beside me, posing as part of the technical support team. Reese had confirmed that the file was loaded into the system, waiting for the signal. The auditorium was large, every seat filled, rows of dark blue uniforms and black suits. Soft lighting, a low hum of conversation. I saw my father in the VIP section, his smile ready for every handshake, with Drew standing beside him like a loyal shadow. Eli touched my shoulder lightly. Ready? I nodded. Ready. The program began. The MC read off each award recipient, polite applause following each name. Then came my father's turn. He walked up to the stage, accepted the crystal trophy, standing tall, his deep voice steady and confident, just as I had heard my entire life. In my 40 years of service, I have always placed the honor of the military and the safety of our soldiers above all else. His gaze swept the room, and when it landed briefly on me, I saw something there, not suspicion exactly, but caution. When he finished speaking, the MC smiled, about to move on. Eli gave a slight nod. I pressed the button. In an instant, the giant screen behind the stage flickered. My father's and Drew's signatures appeared clearly on the Ravencourt contract, followed by an internal email. Profit comes first. Soldier risk is acceptable. A ripple of whispers spread through the crowd. Then Drew's voice filled the hall, deep and cold. Her father wants to handle her himself if she doesn't obey. The air froze. The MC stood motionless. My father turned toward the screen, his face draining of color before twisting into fury. Drew stepped back half a pace, eyes darting for an escape. Camera shutters snapped in rapid fire. A few people rose from their seats. Several officers spoke urgently into radios. Eli had slipped backstage, and I remained seated, my eyes locked on my father. He looked down at me, and for the first time, I saw something I had never seen in him before. Fear. The room erupted the moment the recording ended. Voices overlapped, questions flew from all sides, cameras swung between the stage and where I sat. I stayed perfectly still, back straight, gaze steady on him. He placed the crystal trophy on the podium, his hands gripping so tightly his knuckles whitened. His voice dropped low, trying to keep control, each word forced through clenched teeth. Cut now! A tech staffer rushed forward, but it was too late. The presentation ended, the screen returning to the event logo. Whispers swelled like a wave through the hall. I could see several high-ranking officers in tense discussions, some pulling out their phones, likely to verify what they had just seen. Drew lost his composure completely. He stormed down from the stage, eyes blazing at me. "You'll pay for this pathetic stunt," he snarled, but before he could get closer, 2 event security officers blocked his path. I didn't answer. Instead, I turned slightly toward Reese, seated a few rows away, giving him a small nod. He dipped his head in return, a silent confirmation that the plan had worked perfectly. My father turned back to the microphone, his voice straining for calm, but the tension was unmistakable. "This ceremony is not the place to." A woman's voice rang out from the rows behind me. "General Maddox, do you deny that what we just saw on the screen is true?" The question landed like a blade, drawing every eye in the room to him. He hesitated, then forced a thin smile. "I will not comment until there is an official investigation." Eli appeared beside me then, leaning in to whisper, "We need to leave. Now." I stood, and instinctively, the crowd parted to make a path. No one tried to stop me, but I could feel every stare, some curious, some suspicious, some full of quiet respect. Outside, a light rain had begun to fall. We walked quickly to the SUV parked a few blocks away. Eli opened the door for me, and as soon as I sat down, I saw a new text on my phone from an unlisted number. "Be careful. They won't let this go." I didn't need to guess who had sent it. My mother was still under my father's watch, and she knew better than anyone what he would do when cornered. "We need the next move," Eli said as he started the engine. "The presentation was a hard hit, but to take them down, we need to release all of this to the press and investigators." I nodded. "And this time, I'll make the statement myself. No more staying in the shadows." 2 days later, I received a live interview request from a national news network. They wanted me on air to clarify the shocking incident at the military awards ceremony. I knew I couldn't miss this chance. Before heading to the studio, Eli and I went over every detail. I wouldn't just tell the story, I'd present the most critical evidence: the contract, the email, and the recording, all verified by an independent legal team. The interview took place in a brightly lit studio, cameras trained directly on me. The anchor opened with a clip from the ceremony, then turned to ask, "Claire, why did you choose that moment to go public?" I drew a deep breath, speaking slowly. "Because it was the first time in my life I knew for certain I had nothing left to lose. And because hundreds of soldiers out there deserve to know the truth about the decisions that put their lives on the line." The anchor pressed, "Are you concerned for your safety?" I looked straight into the camera. "I know those who've been exposed won't sit still. But I also know that staying silent means being complicit. And I've chosen the harder path, so that no one else has to die because profit was placed above human lives." The interview ended to the sound of the studio crew applauding, something rare in a live news broadcast. That night, the interview video spread across social media. Major news outlets posted it with headlines highlighting, "General Maddox's daughter exposes weapons contract endangering soldiers." But I knew this meant my father would respond faster than I expected. And sure enough, the next morning, his legal office issued a press statement accusing me of distorting the truth, defaming the family's honor and the military. Eli read it and smirked. "They're starting the legal fight, but we were ready for this." Reese also got back in touch. He said he had more footage from Ravencor's internal system, showing my father and Drew directly ordering field tests of equipment that hadn't met safety standards. This was the kind of evidence that could crush any denial. We arranged to meet at a discreet location in the suburbs. When Reese opened his laptop, the images made my skin go cold. Soldiers training, a device exploding slightly, one man collapsing, while my father stood there, arms crossed, not giving the order to stop. I clenched my fists, my heartbeat pounding. If we release it, it will end his career completely. Eli put a hand on my shoulder. "And save others' lives." I nodded, knowing I'd gone too far to turn back. "If you were me, would you dare to release this footage knowing it would destroy your family ties forever?" Publishing Reese's video was a decision that couldn't be undone. I knew I had to prepare for every consequence: legal attacks, media smears, even direct confrontations with my own father. But when I watched that young soldier collapse again, hearing his comrades shouting in panic through the smoky field, I knew the truth couldn't be buried just to protect a few names. Eli and I worked through the night editing and verifying every piece of footage. We sent copies to 3 major news agencies and handed one to a congressional investigation committee. In the email, I wrote, "This material could save dozens, even hundreds of soldiers' lives. I am ready to testify publicly." The next morning, news broadcasts across the country aired the footage. It was no longer vague allegations, no room for excuses. The public saw my father's face just a few yards from the blast, watching coldly as if it were a routine drill. My phone buzzed nonstop, calls from reporters wanting interviews, messages of support from strangers. But mixed in were anonymous threats, curses, and warnings that I was playing with fire. That afternoon, my mother called. Her voice trembled, so different from her usual composure. "Claire, do you know what you've just done?" "I know exactly, Mom, and I know what would happen if I stayed silent." She was quiet for a long moment before speaking softly. "Be careful. You can't imagine how far they're willing to go." I wanted to ask more, but she hung up. 3 days later, I received a subpoena for an emergency congressional hearing. Eli and Reese came with me. In the waiting room, I recognized familiar faces from past military events, but this time their eyes held not distance or disdain, but curiosity, even a hint of respect. When I entered the hearing room, I saw my father already seated at the opposing table. His uniform was immaculate, medals gleaming, but his face was rigid. Drew sat beside him, gripping a folder tightly. The chairperson began by playing the entire video. The sound of the explosion echoed through the large chamber, and silence fell. When my father appeared on screen, a few members of Congress exchanged skeptical glances. "Lieutenant Colonel Claire Maddox," one congressman spoke, "do you confirm that the person in this video is General Maddox, your father?" I looked straight at him and answered, "I confirm it. And I also confirm that this test violated critical safety protocols, resulting in injury to at least one soldier." Murmurs rose in the room. My father tilted his head slightly, his eyes narrowing as if to pierce through my composure. "Do you have any personal motive for releasing this footage?" another congressman asked. I gave a faint smile. "If you want to call protecting soldiers' lives a personal motive, then yes, I do." The room went silent. The chairperson nodded, signaling me to continue. I recounted the entire process of gathering evidence, how my team and I had been warned when we questioned equipment safety, and why I chose to go public. My father spoke after me, denying all accusations and claiming the video was edited and taken out of context. But when an independent technical expert confirmed the footage's authenticity, his silence lingered longer than usual. The hearing ended without a final ruling, but I knew the tide had turned. Raven Corps' military contracts were suspended pending investigation. My father was relieved of all command duties. That night, I received an email from a soldier who had been in that test. He wrote,
"Thank you.
Without you, I would have always believed my injury was just a training accident." I read that line over and over, and for the first time in years, I felt lighter. Not because of victory, but because I knew I'd made the right choice. Weeks later, a press conference was held to announce the preliminary investigation results. I didn't attend but watched live on television. The spokesperson stated, "There is clear evidence of safety violations and deliberate concealment of the incident. Those involved will face criminal charges." Hearing that, I closed my eyes. Not out of joy, but because I knew a new chapter was beginning, one where I would no longer live in the shadow of General Maddox's daughter. My father still hasn't reached out. My mother sent only a short letter, not mentioning the case, just asking if I was eating well and sleeping enough. I knew she was still caught between both sides, but at least she chose to make contact. As for me, I continued working with the legal team and military oversight groups. We began building an independent training and monitoring program for defense contracts, something that had never existed before. I wanted to turn what I had been through into a foundation so others wouldn't have to endure the same. The wounds between my father and me may never heal. But I've learned that sometimes, to protect what's right, you must be willing to sacrifice what you thought you could never lose. And that's a choice I will never regret. You've just heard my story, a journey not only of confronting a painful truth within my family, but also of choosing to stand for the values I believe in. I know everyone will have their own perspective on choices like this. Some believe family matters should remain private, while others feel justice must come first, even if it means standing against your own blood. I truly want to know, if it were you, what would you do? Would you stay silent to keep the peace, or speak up knowing you might lose the things that matter most? Share your thoughts in the comments. I believe every story and every viewpoint deserves to be heard, and who knows, we might find connection from people who once seemed like strangers. And if you'd like to continue this journey with me, hearing more real stories about life, family, and the tough choices any of us might face, subscribe to the channel so you won't miss what's next. Each story will offer a different slice of life, sometimes making us reflect, sometimes bringing us to tears, but always touching the heart.